This week on the Salesforce Admins podcast, we are talking about mentorship and learning how to code, surprisingly. Not surprisingly, because admins and developers need to know the best practices for creating our apps and deploying the best technology for our organizations. So I'm going to bring on Warren Walters, who is a Salesforce consultant. He's an admin, he's a developer, he's a mentor, and a self-described general geek. Now, Warren's on because he runs a really cool YouTube channel, and I came across his TikToks where he does Salesforce tutorials to help you understand and master the concept of different things in Salesforce. He has this really cool site, salesforcementor.com, and just a really fun guy to talk about in terms of the world of mentorship, what a lot of skills are that he's seeing, and things that people should be paying attention to. Now, before we get Warren on the podcast, I just want to make sure that whatever you're using to listen to the Salesforce Admins podcast, make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button, because then new episodes will show up on your phone or on your computer right away. So with that, let's get to our conversation with Warren. So Warren, welcome to the podcast.
Well, hey, Mike. I'm happy to be here. Super excited because I've been listening to the podcast for such a long time, and I'm finally on it, which is, I guess, I don't know if it's a dream come true or an honor, but I'm just happy to be here.
It's destiny.
That's
what I'll call it. It's destiny. Well, I ran across your TikToks when I was posting stuff about the podcast and really loved like some of the videos that you're doing and the topics you're talking about. So let's just start off with what you do in the Salesforce ecosystem and how you got started.
Sure. So my name is Warren Walters. I am a Salesforce engineer. I do lots and lots of development. I probably talk too much about development. Some of you may or may not have seen my face on YouTube, and that's why I primarily host a lot of my content. And just from my side, I've been in development for about 10 years now, various different companies, various types of companies, to consulting, ISVs, in-house. And more recently, I've been focusing on a lot of mentorship and training in the Salesforce development space. So that's a little bit about me, and I can dive deeper depending on where you want to go.
Well, I think, the mentorship part is intriguing. You said development a lot in this admin podcast, but I mean, we kind of all live in the same space now, right? Like, I think what's interesting is when I started doing Salesforce things back in 2006, there was a clear line between here's things I can do with the UI. Drag and drop GUI was a thing. Oh my God, it's WYSIWYG now. Like that was the new acronym back in 06. But then there was also like really hard things that you had to learn. I remember going across to another part of my organization and talking to a developer who had to learn Python, how to deploy stuff. And so, there was code, and there was like the hard way of doing things. And then there was kind of like the unhard way of doing things as people looked at it. Now those lines seem to be blurred. I mean, I'm looking at some of the data cloud stuff that we're coming out with, and you can very seamlessly connect things through a UI. So let's start with that. Is, sometimes you hear terms where people mash together names of personas of admin and developer, and they think just because it's declarative, it must be developer, or it must be admin, and because it's code, it must be developer.
Yeah, so it's funny you bring up those like personas and the mashing admin and developer together, because as far as I know, it's rising to be called admineloper. Yeah. I've heard that a couple times.
It makes me think of like a jackalope. Have you ever heard of a jackalope?
Yeah,
It's a rabbit with like weird horns.
Yeah, maybe that'll be their mascot in a couple of weeks. Dreamforce is around the corner.
It is.
But yeah, so from my side, especially with the mentorship and what I like to do, or a lot of what I do, is to help people understand that there's not just one type of person anymore. Maybe, years ago it was like that, but now it is very fruitful for you to understand all sides of Salesforce. And this could be the configuration, so knowing how to set things up and the fields and the WYSIWYGs like you mentioned, but also the benefits of knowing some development things. Now, maybe you don't need to jump all the way in where you're writing custom integrations yourself, but to just understand those core fundamental concepts of development can really help you build out more complex solutions and communicate better with your teams. And through mentorship, especially with a lot of admins, it's all about like encouraging them and showing them different resources they can use to really understand some of the concepts that were traditionally a bit foreign to them or kind of like locked away in a separate area, right? That's only for developers, which is not true anymore.
Here be developers. That's what
Yeah.
it said on the map. It's interesting because, like, I think maybe I'll go back 18 months ago. 18 months ago, before I had a really cognizant working awareness of AI, learning code meant, okay, copy the snippet of code, find a developer friend and be like, what does this do? Now, I put a validation rule into ChatGPT just to have it, like double check what I was doing. And it can tell you back, you can copy snippets of code into AI and have it tell you what it's doing. So I have to believe that like some of that acceleration for admins, just basic understanding of code is a little bit greater now that we have some tools like that, right?
Yeah, it's really been an explosion of what tools we have at our availability to help us understand it a lot better. In the past, right, we had maybe things like Stack Overflow and different websites you could go to, or if you were like taking it back, you have to buy a book or something and try to read it. And that
Oh my
barrier
God,
to
go to the
entry,
library.
yeah, right, that barrier to entry really stopped a lot of people from kind of diving in and understanding certain things that were going on in Salesforce development and in code. But now with those other types of tools and even the tools that Salesforce is releasing, we're able to more easily understand different code and formula fields, even our flows now. We're starting to be able to just reduce all of the headache and all of the additional knowledge that you needed to have to be able to work with those particular items. Now there are some benefits of getting that deeper understanding, really learning the fundamentals and branching out further into programming concepts, but at least to get you started, get your feet wet, these like AI tools have been really great for helping people like get some encouragement and seeing if they're on the right path and getting more down to like complex questions, right? Where you're saying, all right, you needed to go to a developer friend to get that looked up. You might come with a more refined question now that you're using AI. Instead of just, here's the code, help me out. I have this particular piece of code. It should do this. How does this look to you? Is it best practice? So the conversations are shifting a little bit more.
Yeah. Plus also just disseminating some of the code that admins would look at. It's not foreign into, I don't know what this does, pages and pages of stuff. I can at least copy it and maybe have AI give me an idea of where to start.
Yeah, and that's kind of funny too, where
Oh yeah.
the starting piece, right? Just because it's really about what it gives you. So in certain aspects, you have to be a little bit careful of AI because of like it could produce code in a different language other than Apex, right? You get Python code.
Oh yeah.
And if you don't know those fundamentals, it can really set you down maybe a rabbit hole or not be as helpful as you think. So it's a word of caution to a lot of my mentees. I definitely want them to use it, but make sure that you're still doing that due diligence to understand like some of the basics of it.
Yeah, if you're having it generate code for you, I think I'm in the translation part of the world. So let's start there though with mentorship. What comes up most in the mentorship and in mentees that you work with?
Certifications is always a big topic. What cert
Imagine that.
should they get, and what should
Sure.
they focus on? What's next? So I think that one is really fun. And another big one is a lot of encouragement, right? Especially for administrators that want to start to look in and dabble with code. A lot of people here, they have this perception that, oh, it's for the geniuses or only people, that go to university, which is not true at all. I've met many, many developers that could code me into a box that have never gone to school, have just learned by themselves, and they're very passionate problem solvers, and they really stick with that craft. So a lot of what I do is encouragement, and then giving people resources for, if you're trying to learn integrations, start with either this trailhead module or this specific article, and bring it back to me, and let's see if we can figure it out together.
Do you find when individuals are coming into the ecosystem, maybe with a coding background, that it's less obvious for them to pay attention to some of the declarative tools that are already built in Salesforce? Or is it intuitive to kind of have them is it natural to just look at everything first and then only go to code as a solution? Or do they just they see everything's a nail and they've got a hammer and I'm going to code them into a box, as you said?
Yeah, it definitely starts out as everything is a nail and code is the hammer. It's funny because, you if you're in a lot of different orgs, especially when I was doing consulting, I got into a few orgs that had code written for very simple things that you can do in configuration, like creating a validation rule or sending an email, that kind of stuff, just tons and tons of lines of code that were not necessary. But whoever got in there first had their mindset was, okay, I know how to code, let me just stick with that. So a lot of people that I talk with and mentor, especially if they have a coding background, that's their first idea. And that's one of the things that I kind of have to educate them on is Salesforce has so many different tools at your disposal. It's better to at least be familiar with everything that's available, like flows and the formula fields, and even just simple things like knowing how a lookup field kind of works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're not coming from this sort of space, it can be a little confusing to understand like what it is and how it works. So I generally recommend going on that kind of journey of starting at the beginning, especially hitting a lot of those like beginner admin trails where you can learn the fundamentals and work your way up into a good spot of understanding all the tools that are available. And then you can jump into code. The code will always be there. There's plenty of reasons to, use it, but you want to use the right tool for the right situation.
Yeah, and it's also, I have to think of just best use of your time, right? Like you could code escalation rules, you could code a workflow, but flow leaves you with an artifact that's easily upgradable and reproducible, as opposed to something custom that, who knows, maybe something 10 releases down the line, Salesforce is going to change.
Right.
And now you might have to rebuild that Apex code.
Yeah, that's a big point, especially in consulting, that you have to think about, because a lot of times you may not be there 1 year later, 2 years later, just because the contract or the project is ending. So designing for the team that is going to be there is very important, right? If you're going to leave a ton of code only with a team of admins, then that may not be the best solution for you. Or there might be a little bit of in between where you can build out the complex pieces inside of code, but also leave the administrative side, or leave the ability for the administrative side to have like configuration or custom settings that can manipulate the code. All things like that are things that you need to start to think about when you look at the longevity of your code and the maintainability.
Yeah. Do people that you work with and start to work with, when they come into the ecosystem, do they know their path? Are they looking at consulting or being a developer first? Or is it just kind of eyes wide open, help me figure something out, Warren?
A lot of it is eyes wide open. Lots of existing admins know that the developer path is out there, but people just starting out, often they hear about development from other tech stacks and they know that it's out there, but it's hard to understand like, hey, where should I be going? What should I be looking at? So it's really about, there's a lot of education that goes on, and there are so many different opportunities in Salesforce. So you need to try to find, or I kind of recommend trying out a bunch of things. But especially if maybe you have a background in project management or system management, like databases and things like that, take a look at how that translates directly over into a Salesforce career.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, often it's you start off with an idea, and I've had a lot of friends too that were admins for a while, and then they see that consulting dollar sign, and they start chasing the money, and obviously you can do that in any career. So that's interesting. You mentioned something that I wanted to think a little bit about, which is the topics that admins and developers should think about. So I started us kind of a little bit dumped into the deep end with AI. But we have declarative side, we have the code side. What is some of the stuff that admins and developers that you're mentoring aren't paying attention to? And you're like, folks, the street light, the spotlight is on. You totally missed the sign on the side of the road. Like, how did you blow past this exit kind of scenario?
That is really cool, like topic to bring up. I think a lot of it stems to one, like, okay, they know about AI. They probably are at least dabbling in it. If you're not dabbling in it, I would recommend at least looking at it. So that's one big piece. But the other part is probably more, I kind of want to say on like the soft skills, or it's really around communication, right? Because especially for a lot of introverted people, it may not seem like it, but I'm pretty introverted. But it's around how you can communicate effectively, either with your boss or your teams or anybody that you're working with, and that can be a huge valuable asset to you as an individual, because it can help propel you into different types of roles that maybe somebody else that's lacking those skills or still working on those skills, they're not able to jump into. What kind of goes hand in hand with that is more personal branding as well. So this is like how you present yourself on LinkedIn, doing things like YouTube channels, having a blog, and that can also propel you like a cut above the rest, especially in like a competitive market. So having that awareness of where you're at and how you want to be presented to the outside world can be very important for like a hiring manager to make a decision on. So I recommend everybody kind of working on a portfolio or having some sort of like additional thing above the defaults of like your resume, and having a basic LinkedIn portfolio and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm so on board with everything you just said, because I feel like for a lot of my career when I was an admin, not only was it just understanding the configuration, but for lack of a better phrase, I'll say it was selling the configuration, like really communicating to the organization. No. I know how to do this, and this is what's best for right now based on what you told me, and confidently communicating that, right? And then to your second point, showing up. I love it when people looked like their profile pictures. Like it's so much, because you look at, you think of how much you're online, and when you see like especially with like a coworker, your Slack avatar all the time, and then you see them in person, you're like, and they look the same. You're like, oh, I know I have the right person.
Yeah.
Because I've always joked that I'm an introvert, but I play an extrovert for work, right? Like I can summon up a solid 8 or 9 hours of extrovertness, but like 5:30 at Dreamforce, the bell tolls. Like Mike is running down the stairs, glass slippers falling off. He's turning into a pumpkin. He really wants to get back to his hotel room and just like have some quiet stare at the wall time. But being able to show up and look familiar, and then, interact with people. And that's how you network. And that's how you get different ideas, shared with everybody too.
I'm on board with that 100% because at least for me, a lot of what you see online, pretty 100% of what you see online, I'm going to be the same exact way at a conference, right? As soon as you see me, after I say hello, what is your name? I'm going to start spewing development and Salesforce right at you. So I think that is important, though, to be authentic wherever you're presenting yourself, because you it's going to take that toll on you, right? Especially over time, especially if you're working at a place where either you have to change yourself to do that. It's important to be at home as much as you can in where you work and how you're presenting yourself.
Yeah. I mean, for the longest time, I wore a red shirt everywhere, and it was very easy to spot Mike in the red shirt, Okay. So I had this question down, but in hearing you answer it, and God, I've done a million of these podcasts, I'm going to ask it to you different. So one of the questions, and you probably get this too, is like, all right, so what is good places to start learning? I'm going to ask you that, but I'm going to give you the caveat of you can't say the word trailhead. And the reason I'm going to say that is, like, look, I work at Salesforce. Trailhead's table stakes. We all know to go there. Everybody in the community knows to go there. If you don't know to go there, you should go there. You're going to hear it at user groups. What are other places that you should go that are good places to learn in addition to Trailhead?
How much can I plug? Websites. I've got how much is allowed.
Yeah.
There are a few sites that I really love for either practicing Salesforce development or even Salesforce administration. So, and I'm a big YouTube person. If you've looked me up at all, I love video, that kind of stuff. So there are some really major channels on there that I definitely follow. So some of them are Apex Hours on YouTube. There's Matt Gary's channel, which is also very focused on Salesforce development. So also look at those. And then especially like thinking more like either when I'm studying for a certification or being more well-rounded, right? A lot of us know about Focus on Force, which is great. But what I like to do whenever I'm either taking an exam or studying is, okay, maybe I'm doing some practice items, but I'm also actually building out the practice scenarios, maybe the exam question or something like that inside a Salesforce org, so that I'm retaining the knowledge a little bit better than just, clicking through a few different examples. So this works really well for both administration and development, right? Just recreate the scenario the best you can when you're working through those. On top of that, there are some really great, if you're looking to dive and learn development, really great sites for that. So there's freecodecamp.org, which is more of HTML, JavaScript. It's like web languages. But like I've been mentioning, once you learn the fundamentals of development, you can transfer it around to any language, and it will really help out in your configuration inside of Salesforce, right? So if you know how to do flows, either on the basic levels, like an if statement is an if statement, an iterator, a loop is a loop in every different language. So you're able to translate some of those a little bit easier once you know how they work under the hood. Trying to think of some other ones. I know there are a ton, and maybe I can link some down in the show notes and stuff like that. But
I didn't mean to put you on the spot for that. But to be honest with you, every time I ask the question, like, "Oh, go to Trailhead," it's like, "Where do you start?" Well, what are you looking for? And to me, it's now to the point. I mean, Trailhead's been around, I think, almost 10 years. To me, now it's to the point where it's like the help and FAQ part of a website. The first time that you saw a help or an FAQ on a website, you're like, "Oh, I wish every website had this." And to me, that feels table stakes. You should be able to do that. But then to your point, there are things that you should learn, like communication skills and presenting skills and personal branding skills. And some of that's on there. But there's also good sites and good places to go to learn stuff like that. Last question, a little bit of a curveball, but as a mentor, you've worked with a lot of people. What is one quality that is consistent across all of your mentees that seems to really drive their success?
I think one of the big ones is around persistence,
Mm.
especially in the Salesforce space, configuration and development. I kind of prescribe to a notion of let me give you just enough so that you know where to look. You can be very dangerous, but not giving you everything to complete or solve like challenges or whatever wacky idea that I've come up with at that point. So, knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, there's a solution for every problem, especially in coding. Like we're not inventing anything new, right? An if statement is an if statement. Some of these things that we are creating have been studied and perfected over a long period of time. So all you need to do is really find it and then use that solution and make that existing solution work for whatever your problem is. So kind of understanding that idea of, okay, as long as I keep working at it, keep pushing, something will come from this that will put me in a better situation than I am currently is really what I start to stress in a lot of the mentees that I work with. I think it can get overwhelming to learn development and maybe you don't feel like you're making progress, but a lot of times it's about like looking back and reflecting on how far you've come to see some of the progress, right, that you've actually been doing, which is really cool. So I think that's a big one, right? Persistence and then knowing when to ask questions may have come up before, but you're working on your own. You've found a lot of resources and you're going through and you end up getting stuck on one particular piece. I think it's important once you are completely stuck and you've done as much research as you can, of course, to reach out. And it's kind of humbling because I was maybe years ago, I didn't like to ask for questions, right? I was like, oh, I should know everything or I should be able to figure this out on my own. And I started progressing so much faster once I was able to say, all right, I've done enough research. I've looked at it. I'm going to ask a very educated question to somebody that has done this before, somebody who has been through whatever experience it could be as small as like making a formula field or as big as, writing an integration to a third party system.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, persistence is right there. You said that answer, educated question, right? Like, and this actually came up, I want to say about a month ago or so. I interviewed David, who does Wordle and Sudoku on YouTube and TikTok. He also does coding, which is interesting. I feel like maybe a lot of software engineers and developers do Wordle and Sudoku. But I would rather, he said in working with team members, I would rather have a team member spend 10 minutes working through what they know to try and solve the problem and then come to me with a question, as opposed to just immediately hitting a problem and going, how do I do this? Right? Like throw your hands up. And I think, when I've worked with people too, it's, well, how would you work through this? Because you need to start putting those connections together, because every time something like this happens, there isn't going to be a Warren behind you that you can just turn around and be like, now what do I do? So educated question. That was really good. Warren, thanks for taking time out of your day and being persistent and mentoring people and being a part of the great Salesforce community.
Yeah, Mike, it's been a pleasure and an honor, and I guess destiny to finally end up on the Salesforce Admin podcast. Super happy that I was able to make it out and kind of spread the word about development. If you're scared about it, if you don't think it's for you, do not worry. I don't think it's for me, right? Everybody thinks that. Just try to take it one step at a time and or reach out to me, or a lot of developers are very, very helpful in the Salesforce Ohana. So so happy that we finally made this happen.
You bet. Thanks, Warren. So that was a fun discussion with Warren. I love the term educated question. Going back and really thinking through it makes me think of that podcast that I did with David or Ranks on Sudoku and Wordle solving, which is, thinking through what are all the possible ways I can solve this, exercising those, and then turning to my community and seeing how they can help me based on what I've done, because you might find a creative way of doing something. But I couldn't agree more. Persistence. There is a light at the end of every tunnel. And I think his site is very inspiring. I just pulled it up, and the first thing it says, remember, I believe in you. So thank you, Warren, for being on the podcast. Now, if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to click that follow or subscribe button so that new episodes are downloaded. And of course, if you're looking for resources, folks, right down below in the show notes, I'm going to link to anything that Warren mentioned, including his social profile. But you can always find resources at admin.salesforce.com. That is your one stop for everything admin, release information, more podcasts, and a transcript of the show. Now, be sure to join our conversation in the Admin Trailblazer group. That is, of course, on the Trailblazer community. And you know where to find the link for that? That's right. It's in the show notes on admin.salesforce.com. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed it a lot. And until next week, I'll see you in the cloud.